Thank you for joining us to discuss the 10 things that require zero talent. We will discuss 10 attributes that the experts say require no talent. Many of these items are common sense, but some will be a revelation for others. Our first 10 things are being on time. How many times have you been early for a meeting only to have it delayed because one of the principals involved is late? You made sure to allow enough time for slow traffic, finding a parking space, and made sure you had your iPad, phone, or even a Padfolio to take notes if necessary, and grab your favorite beverage only to sit there for 10 or 15 minutes waiting for the meeting to start. You may hope the meeting will not run over because you need to get back to your office in an hour for your next meeting. You get more agitated by the minute and think of all things that are unkind. You may even sort through your to-do list of what needs to be done that you're not getting done. I worked for an employer for about 15 years that was never on time for anything. He actually was 4 hours late for his first date with his wife. She managed to entertain herself in the bar, make friends, and have a great time. When he arrived, she shook his hand and announced that she was leaving. It turned out well in the end. Even for their wedding, she told him the ceremony was 2 hours earlier than it actually was, in hopes that he would be on time. He was only a half an hour late. When I was first employed in his office, he routinely left clients waiting 45 minutes or even longer while he was on the phone or was late getting back from lunch or another meeting. Many times the clients would leave or sit there and stew, getting more and more upset. The receptionist and I would take turns going into the waiting room and speaking with them, but of course, it wasn't the same as him being on time. In Dr. Phil's early days on television, he had a woman on the show that was habitually hours late for everything. When he called her arrogant and selfish, I was rather surprised that he would take that path. His thought was that she procrastinated because she thought, they can't possibly start without me. And she had scenarios where she was kept in conversation for hours that she says she didn't want to be in, but seemed to manage to keep the discussion going. She needed to be needed and given attention, so even when she was late, everyone fawned over her, glad that she was okay and she hadn't been in an accident. After I thought about it for a while, I could see Dr. Phil's point about people thinking you will wait because you're so important to the group. But to continually be late was a habit that she needed to break. Our second 10 things is work ethic. How often do we lament because the younger generation doesn't have the same work ethic as the older generation? It seems that each batch of graduating seniors look younger and younger. Each generation loses a little more of what their predecessors brought to the workplace. According to Steve Factor, and that's spelled F-A-K-T-O-R if you want to look it up, the founder of the Idea Factory, there are always several types of personalities in the workforce. The alpha or the go-getter, the survivor who's always put out but keeps missing being laid off. They are the manipulators who get promoted just to get them out of the department. The soldier, who's the worker bee. The Bambi, who's the new recruit, fresh out of school with no experience. The believer, who is entrenched in corporate culture, wears corporate logos, and has trophies of office picnics and photos on his desk. The pragmatist is the opposite of the believer. They are skeptical. analytical, and idealistic. The naturals are ambitious and talented, but demand balance in their life. They deliver results and earn loyalty and respect. They are born networkers and respond best when the corporate mission aligns with their values. Some are visionaries who can change the world. Others don't like rules and go rogue. The toiler represents the largest portion of the corporate population. They view work as necessary to get what matters most to them outside of work, like family, travel, or hobbies. They may not be looking to conquer the world, but are essential for the success of any company. How often are you buried under piles of work that are all due to yesterday, and your coworkers are standing in the hallway or around the water cooler discussing the newest Hollywood scandal or last night's football game? They take a 2-hour lunch break or leave early, all on a consistent basis. Have you noticed that some people seem to get away with doing very little while you slave away, tied to your desk for hours, not even taking lunch, and postponing bathroom breaks, just to get that project or report finished by the deadline? Or worse, you take your work home. Sacrifice your downtime, your family time, your time to rejuvenate, all in the name of what's good for the company. Please be very careful about being readily agreeable to sacrifice your personal time for the company, especially if you're an hourly employee and get no compensation for this time. Yes, you want to be seen as a team player. Yes, you want to further the company's business or cause. Yes, you want your boss to be able to rely on you, but be sure to put boundaries there so you won't be taken advantage of. Just because you do one project from home over a weekend to meet a tight deadline doesn't mean it should continue for the length of your employment. I've noticed that when you're hired and start a job at a certain level of care for the job, skills, dedication, and responsibility, your supervisors always expect that same level or higher from you, no matter how good or how bad. Let's let that statement sink in for a few moments. What this means is that if Joe is hired and immediately exhibits traits of a slacker, but he's well liked and squeaks out some decent work, it's likely he'll stay on. On the flip side, if Susie is hired and is gung-ho, always prepared, meets or exceeds all her deadlines, then for some reason is no longer able to continue in this same manner, such as she may be ill, going through a difficult breakup, or grieving a loss, she's more likely to be let go for performance issues than Joe is. While this isn't fair treatment, it's probably something we've all seen at one time or another in our careers. It actually happened to me. In 2000, I went through a difficult breakup of a 22-year marriage. Over the next 5 years, I was continually harassed, beaten down, and had my children turned against me. In 2004, my ex became ill and spent several months in a coma in the ICU unit with hepatitis. In March of the next year, he suffered a double brain bleed and was brain dead. We had to make the decision to call him off life support. For the next month, I was a total basket case. I may not have wanted to be married to him any longer, but I certainly didn't want him to die, and I didn't want my children to suffer. 31 days after my husband's death, I was called into our conference room and was told they wanted my resignation. Their major complaint was that we ran out of copier toner for 1 hour during tax season. knowing full well that I'd never ordered office supplies in my entire career and had only been doing it for 2 months. Basically, Junior had taken over for Senior, who had trained me. But he didn't like how I handled customer service. He thought it was overboard. So since it was his desire that I no longer work for him, I demanded that he put his big boy pants on and actually fire me because I was not going to resign. I'd done nothing wrong to warrant resigning. He'd been hired by his father about a year after I joined the company, and as he worked his way up through the management chain, I stayed where I was. There was no upward mobility for me in my position. There were originally only 7 people in the firm, so where was I to go? What they saw was a raw recruit who'd not used a computer much before going on a 5-year sabbatical to raise children. They saw me as someone to order around rather than a partner or a team member. At one point, I told them I didn't want to manage or supervise people, so when a job came available that I could have done a lot with, since I now had leadership experience with the professional organization IAAP, they never once asked me if I was interested in that position. Our third thing is effort. Everyone has their own unique sets of skills and talents. So if asked to stretch them or work on a project that's outside of your usual skill sets, you may not be able to succeed. You may have moments of brilliance, but not be able to maintain that level or complete the project or task within the deadline. Your work ethic and efforts towards the project may keep you from getting a black mark against you, as long as you make a strong effort and communicated your status so assistance can be given in order to meet the deadline. At one point in my career, as I said earlier, I took over 5 years off to stay home with my young children. They were 5 and 3 at the time and demanded a lot more time and energy. I even had another child during that time. It was great to be home with the family. Life was much less complicated. We didn't need to worry about who was picking the baby up from the sitter or who was taking her to the doctor. I started cooking and baking from scratch. I babysat other children for a little extra money, and I became the quintessential Kool-Aid mom in the neighborhood because we had a volleyball net and a swimming pool. So when it became time to re-enter the workforce, I was way behind my peers. Much to my surprise, computer use had exploded with the creation of WordPerfect, Lotus, even Harvard Graphics, and DBase 3. I knew nothing about these programs and hadn't used my shorthand since leaving business school about 13 years prior. This boss still dictated, in person and on tape. So on my lunch break, I went to the local library and checked out a book on shorthand and signed up for a refresher course of typing office practice at the local high school. I never said anything to my new boss about this, but I must have mentioned it in passing to another staff member. Apparently, word got to the boss about that, and he told me it impressed him that I wanted to refresh my skills so I could do a good job for him. This was something I didn't even think about very hard. I just knew I needed to hone my skills, so I just did it. I hate to feel like I don't know what I'm doing. I like to feel in control of my skills and that I can be of service. He appreciated my effort to better myself. Even if you make the effort and fail, at least you've made the effort. You will have learned something along the way, so the next time you'll have a better chance to succeed. Do you ever look around and wonder to yourself, and maybe even whisper to others, that if this other person spent as much time working as he or she did avoiding their work, how much they could get done in a day. I've seen this a lot over the last 40 years, and it never ceases to amaze me just how lazy some people are. Now, for example, my grandfather was one of those people. He was a carpenter by trade, and he'd worked on the railroad. The shop attached to the garage was bigger than the garage. He had every tool imaginable, both old and new. At one point, he needed a new roof on their 1930s bungalow living in Kansas. Instead of just doing the roof or asking his friends to help, he spent 3 days figuring out a pulley system so that he could do the roof by himself. As my grandparents aged, the hot weather started to bother them. It was often over 100 degrees before 9 a.m. during the summers. My grandmother used to go work in the garden at 7 before it got hot, when it was already 85 or 90 degrees. So my grandfather set to thinking about this problem. The first thing he developed was a metal bracket with a wood panel on hinges. This device was installed on all the windows on the north side of the house. That was very important because the wind blew on that side of the house. There was nothing blocking it there. So when the wind blew from front to back, the panel would be pushed against the bracket and force the air into the house. When the wind blew from back to front, the panel would go to the other side of the bracket and do the same. While this helped, it was still Kansas, and their wind wasn't coming off any hills like in New York. Therefore, it wasn't any cooler than the ambient temperature. So when my grandmother bought her brand new Admiral side-by-side refrigerator freezer, the old unit, which still functioned, was moved to the side of the house outside in front of one of the living room windows. He connected power and put a switch in the house under the window. If it got too hot, they would turn on the compressor in that old fridge to help cool off the room. So he may have been lazy, but I think he was innovative in his own way. Our fourth thing is body language. Sometimes you don't think, and your thoughts and feelings are written all over your face and your body, seen in the way you cross your arms or lean forward towards someone you're talking with. We often don't realize the silent messages we portray without even trying. People can tell if you're angry, and we all have telltale signs. Some people have a vein in their temple bulge or their face gets red. When my boss is frustrated, she puts her face in her hands. I often get the deer in the headlights look when I can't remember something that's being discussed. Have you noticed that the crossed arm pose in photos now shows a confident and powerful business statement? Didn't it used to mean that you were closed off and resistant of what was being talked about? And as a woman, didn't that just mean you were cold? This could be a whole seminar by itself, but in the time allotted, we won't be able to get into that much detail. So if you're interested, make the effort to read up on body language and see what your telltale characteristics mean to others. You may want to talk to a trusted coworker or family member to see how you're perceived, so you can enhance or change it. So let's talk about energy. We all know the world is full of those perky, energetic people who never seem to be tired and are always upbeat and positive and run circles around everyone else. On the flip side, there are always those who are low energy and seem to be slow moving, appear lazy, and unhappy. My mother was always low-key. She was quiet. She sat a lot. And looking back, I believe she was totally exhausted with 4 children and a full-time job when it was not popular in the 1960s. I now understand why she would ask me to do things for her when I was a teenager. I'm sure her bones hurt, and she was tired after working at the factory on her feet all day and taking care of my sick father all evening. At the time, I didn't understand because I was comparing how I felt with how she acted. It wasn't a fair comparison, but I didn't know that at the time. Now that I'm in my 60s, I certainly do understand how much my feet hurt, my joints ache, and why I tend to stay put while I'm at home. I do, however, try to portray a higher energy attitude at work. I try to keep my voice upbeat and my statements positive, but sometimes that's a struggle. If you remember the character on Saturday Night Live, Debbie Downer, you don't want to be that person in the workplace. People will try to avoid you and shy away from working with you. Some people are very sarcastic or have a dry sense of humor. Just be sure, if you do, that you don't overuse it at work. Sarcasm is one thing, but rude and hurtful statements and comments are something you don't want to be denigrated to. So attitude is closely tied with energy. You can be low energy, but still have a can-do attitude. I've tried to keep this as an auto response. When asked if something can be done, yes, let me check into it, and I'll get back to you if there's a problem. I once had a boss who said, I can teach skills, but I can't teach attitude. I've borrowed this statement more than once over the years, and it seems appropriate in many circumstances. Anyone can take a class and learn a new skill. Attitude is the culmination of all of your life lessons, and while it can be changed with some learning behaviors and effort, it tends to stay the same throughout your adult life, barring traumatic circumstances, unless you want to change it. Have you ever dealt with someone who always says no? This can't be done. I'd never do that. Instead, they should be saying, well, I can't do it the way you describe. I can do it this way. Try to turn the negative into a positive. That shows you can perceive the situation in another light and tell the other person what can be done rather than what can't be done. I worked with an HR director at one point who would always say, we can't do, and it didn't matter what it was. It was whatever. After researching many of these discussions, we found that we could. It wasn't illegal. However, it would have a result that was not sought out. She perceived it as not being a team player. The upper management tried going around her to get things done, and it was a very, very difficult situation. And she eventually left on her own because she wasn't getting anything done that she wanted to do because people were fighting her. I also heard that you should replace the word but with and. It totally changes the feeling, but generally not the context. Give it a try and see if the attitudes around you change. Remember, only you can change your attitude, and it comes from within you and not from external circumstances. Our next thing is passion. Passion for what you do, your job, your family, your religion, your charities, your pets, and your hobbies are integral to your personality. They make up your character, and your passion shines through. Career-wise, I'm passionate about newsletters. I like to communicate. And streamlining processes. I'm lazy and I hate repetitive tasks. On the home front, I'm passionate about my dog, Chumley, a 6-year-old red Chow Chow, reading and knitting. I may be passionate about more than one thing. You don't need to be laser focused about just one thing in your life, although sometimes people are. We saw in a recent election that people are passionately for or against one president. This was the most debated and passionate showing for an election in many years. The passion has spilled over into spewing hateful comments on social media, violence in our streets, and work and family discord. Passion can be good, or it can turn sour. We had to say no politics in the office. It was so divided. We all know someone who collects something, whether it's flamingos, monkeys, cats, antiques. They fill every space they inhabit with them, whether it's home, work, even in their car, and portrayed on their clothes. Excuse me. Your boss wants you to be passionate about your job, to care so much that you will go out of your way for your job, to be conscientious enough to stay late to finish the project, or work on a Saturday to make sure the customer is satisfied, or to follow up with a vendor to make sure they received your order and the shipment is scheduled, or to double check your facts before the email is sent to the CEO. But be sure to strike the balance for work and home. Many of us sacrifice one for the other. We may feel we must sacrifice home for work in order to keep our jobs or to be promoted. Depending on your boss, he or she may be agreeable to a slight delay because of Johnny's soccer game, but others may not. You'll need to determine which your boss is before you attempt to say no. Do not just assume they expect you to give up your family time for work projects. Try to establish a rapport with them. Share some details where they see that you have a family life. They'll be less likely to shortchange your family time if they know about your kids being in sports or playing a tournament next weekend. If you've seen the movie Elf with Will Ferrell and James Caan, there's a scene where Walter, who is James Caan, needs to give a pitch for a new children's book to his boss, and it has to be on Christmas Eve. He's sacrificing his family time to appease his boss. Buddy, who's played by Will Ferrell, interrupts his meeting, and Walter throws him out. During the pitch, his son Michael comes in concerned because Buddy ran away. After some wavering, he tells the boss off and leaves to rescue his son, Buddy. This was a great example of having no boundaries at work and spending all your time at or on work. I had a boss who worked almost every Saturday. He would call me at 9 a.m., usually while I was in the bathtub, to ask me where a file was or if I'd sent a letter out. It was seriously uncomfortable for me, but he had no idea what I was doing. I tried several measures to counteract his need to call me. I left him notes. I left him lists. I put files on his desk, but nothing worked. I did mention it once in a conversation in a funny way that I was in the bathtub the last time he called me on a Saturday or Sunday morning, and he did slow down some. Our next thing is being coachable. This was a surprise to me on the list, but the more I thought about it, the more it made sense. I've seen many people who are stubborn and close-minded in business. They only see one way to handle a situation, and it's their way, or the way they handled it in their job 25 years ago. It can be difficult to deal with that if that's your boss, but when it's a colleague, it's another matter. I worked with a lady some years ago. She was my age, but she'd become jaded by life's circumstances and the things she'd been through, that it colored every aspect of her life, including her career, her family relationships, etc. She used sarcasm and insulting humor to get her point across, and if someone disagreed with her, look out. You were going to get an earful. She was incensed when her boss called her on her behavior. She didn't see it as a problem and couldn't understand why others didn't want to be told off all the time or told they were stupid. She had learned to read people very well, and that was a defense mechanism to protect herself from being in an abusive relationship and an abusive upbringing. But she allowed that to follow her into the workplace, and she saw no reason not to share her own view of the world, even if it differed from everyone around her. Unfortunately, she was let go during downsize because her boss didn't want to deal with her any longer. So when your boss or colleague suggests a new or different way to do something, don't discount it outright. Be coachable enough to give it a fair shot. Doing extra. Now, when I hear this, some may automatically think that means working from home or being a yes person, or creates visions of the bumbling PA running after her tornado of a boss while he shouts orders or questions at him or her. I think that rather than that, this means going the extra mile in consideration. For example, my boss got a notice that after-school activities were canceled due to weather. Her sitter thought school was closing early. Rather than let her fumble while she was still trying to work and get ready for a meeting with the president in the next 10 minutes, I took it upon myself to pull up the weather closings to see the school's announcement. It was a little thing that only took a few seconds, but clarified her dilemma and put her mind at ease. And I got a thank you out of it. In the past, yes, I did make coffee, grab lunch, even sent flowers to the wife for my boss. I also went shopping at a nearby store for wedding, graduation gifts, and whatever to his friends. You'll need to temper what you're willing to do with what would make your boss happy or feel special. I used to think that if I took care of my boss, then he could take care of the clients. After several years of that, though, I felt like I was babysitting a 55-year-old man. He started blaming me when he missed lunch or when he went home late, although it was his own thought process that kept him there. Or when he got stuck on a lengthy phone call. I don't know how I could stop that, but he blamed me anyway. He got dependent on me doing all those little things, so he didn't have to. It's one thing to accept assistance. It's another to expect it. I started to think of ways he could be more self-sufficient. I started writing up pending lists and sending him email updates on Friday afternoons so I wouldn't get that dreaded phone call Saturday morning. I would go over the client files on my desk so he knew where my work was. As time went on, and I worked for him for 15 years, I wrote most of his correspondence, I read and answered his emails, and I could copy his writing style. I also could sign his name better than he could. I began sharing with him my weekend plans so he would think twice about calling when we had play practice or a wedding to attend. We often are asked questions about how much some project costs, or to quote, what would be the cost to complete a project. We find that our memory isn't always reliable. At least mine isn't always. And I need to verify facts before sending off that email. Fact-checking before sharing the information is always preferable. You don't want to put your boss in the position where he or she has to backtrack and say that they were wrong. That makes the boss lose credibility, and it erodes yours as well. As I said before, this must be tempered with balance. Don't become so indispensable that the boss can't function in your absence. Keep your boss updated on pending projects and advise of deadlines are going to be missed. Tell them when you change a procedure and share updates from other departments. The more upfront and transparent you are, the better working relationship you will have. Being prepared. As we talked about being on time, being prepared is just as important. If you're on time, but don't have your notepad or the agenda for the meeting with you, you'll be seen as not prepared. If you're slated to be on the agenda, by all means be versed in what you are speaking about. If you're the committee chair and your event is coming up, bring your notes to give everyone a status update. If you're supposed to share an update of a project, bring your Gantt chart and refresh your memory before the meeting so you can speak to the project intelligently. If you have regular staff meetings where the facilitator goes around the room for comments, questions, or updates, bring an idea with you to participate. Even if you aren't comfortable, after a while, you will be. What better practice for public speaking? My current supervisor has what she calls leadership team meetings once a week. This meeting is generally 2 hours long and consists of budget reviews, project updates, personnel issues, reminders of other meetings, and various other topics. The boss, who is the associate director and an assistant director, and I all attend these meetings. I make sure my iPad or laptop is charged. I actually pull up a blank Word page on the screen for notes. I have my drink, possibly some tissues depending on what season it is, and I'm in my preferred seat 5 minutes before the meeting is scheduled to start. I make a quick trip to the ladies' room just to be safe. If I have questions or need to share anything, that's also typed on my screen so I can refer to it when the opportunity arises. I take notes only for myself because everyone else takes their own notes. When we started this meeting, I would take notes for everyone and share it, but it became redundant very quickly. I only write down action items and decisions made. That way we have a record of what and when the decision was made if there's a question later on. I keep a printout of the action items until they're completed, like a to-do list, and then it's tossed. The electronic copy is filed on a SharePoint site that we all can leverage. You'd be amazed how often we refer to these notes. If you cannot attend a meeting where you're supposed to give a report, don't just skip it. Write a report and send it to the meeting facilitator so that they can read it on your behalf. Being prepared is sometimes like taking a shot in the dark. Having things ready and then not needing them can be frustrating for some, but I would rather be safe than sorry. It's not as if I will never need the item I prepared. It's just it wasn't needed for that meeting. So in conclusion, The title of this presentation was 10 Things That Require Zero Talent. However, I may take a little issue with that statement. These 10 things are all important, don't get me wrong, but organizing and arranging to cover all 10 of these things does take some talent, or at least some skill. You may try and succeed, you may try and fail. Practice does make perfect, and the better you can anticipate your boss's needs, the more successful you will become. It doesn't happen overnight unless you're in that 1% where you immediately click. I've worked for my current boss for a little more than 4 years, and we started working very well together after about 1 year. And now it seems we can finish each other's sentences. So what do you think? Go through the list and say whether you think it requires talent or not. And then share with me your thoughts, comments, or questions. I'd be glad to have a discussion. Thank you so much for attending, and I hope you will participate. And I hope you got a little something out of our time together. Thank you for spending your time with Rising to Excellence Admin Training. I look forward to seeing you again soon. Bye for now.